And there we go. And that should do it. Let's see if that works. Are we here? Are we live? Are we happening? Hello, my friends. Good evening. Good to see you, or good morning, or good afternoon, or wherever you may happen to be. I always forget. I always start out with good morning or good evening, or actually, let's often say good evening because it's 1 a.m. in the morning, my time. So that feels rather on the late side. But obviously, those of you who are in Europa, in Europe, for Americans, Europe, are in the morning hours. And those of you who are on the other parts of the world, we occasionally get folks from South Africa or Australia or Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. Anyway, are obviously on a different time because that's the way time works. Because time only moves so fast, you see. So it can only get from one part of the world to another slowly. And it takes an hour each time it crosses a line. Don't ask me why. I'm not a scientist. I'm a fantasy writer. Anyway, I think we've got everything up and running here. So let me check and see who has popped in to say hello so far. I see Kristen has, and there is my beloved mother-in-law, Hazel. Hello, Hazel. Hi. Good to see you. I'm glad Deb got to talk to you today. I was running past on the way to the office, so I just waved and blew kisses. Christina, good to see you. Suzanne, a pleasure. Andre, as always, excellent. Chris, good to see you too. And Nikki, hello, Nikki. This is Nikki Chetwynd. Nicole, or Nicole, to pronounce it slightly more Frenchified. Debbie, hi, Debbie. And Penny, and Carol, and Mark is checked in, and also Ilva, hello, sweetie, and Robert Henry and Isaac have all checked in one shape or form. So here we is, and here we are, and we are back. We are back. I know the lighting is a little strange this time, a little mysterious. That's because I had the backlights on as well as the front lights, as well as my little camera light. And having the lights on behind me, I had this glow off the top of my head, which was quite saintly, but not really in character. So I have dispensed with the backlights, and we just have the front lights this time. So that's not that there's that much to see. And unfortunately, it makes me even more prominent, but such is life. It was an artistic decision, an aesthetic decision. I made it on the fly. I'm going to live with it. So, and I never look at these videos anyway, so it doesn't matter a lot to me. Anyway, good to see you. Good to be back. Good to be, I mean, I know I was back last week, but good to be back to reading, which I will be doing in just a short while. Before that, let me catch you up with everything that's been going on. Actually, things are starting to get slightly more normal here. We are gradually digging out from under boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes. If you've ever seen, like a dystopian picture of a collapsing city of the future, when human beings have gone largely feral and the streets are full of cannibal mutants and things like that. The first couple of weeks we were here, it was definitely looking like that just because we had so much stuff stacked up and no place to, we didn't know where we wanted to put anything. And this is a slightly smaller house. We that's one of the reasons we chucked out so much stuff, which I have to confess has left me feeling a little lighter in the soul. Just not to be carrying as much stuff around with me this time. But because of that, we still wound up with a ton of stuff in the house and just piled up in boxes everywhere. And you, to get from one end of the house to the other, to get into the garage or anything, you had to do this like limbo shimmy thing and turn sideways and suck in your gut and stuff like that. So we are finally getting past that point. Better than that, as I think I mentioned last week, I'm actually getting some time to work on the book, which is nice. So I updated my abstract because I realized there was a couple small scenes I still needed to add in. And before I could do that, when you're dealing with a 1,200-page manuscript, it's much easier if you have the equivalent of a table of contents. And at this early stage of things, my table of contents, this is just me personally, how I work, is I have an abstract, which just goes chapter by chapter with a little capsule description of what the scenes are in that chapter. And it's not really much use for me well, it helps a little bit to see if I'm, as I'm going through it, to say, oh, okay, well, that character definitely hasn't been around for a while. We need to check back in on that. But largely I use it in editing, and I use it as a shortcut to finding things that I have to find, like, oh God, that's right, that has to be fixed, and that's back somewhere back there. But I cannot keep even the different chapter numbers, with 50 something chapters. I can't be absolutely certain which chapter everything's in, let alone pages and things like that. And so it's a great help. So I updated my abstract so I can now do the last couple of additions I need to add. And meanwhile, I'm chugging through on the overall edit, which is going along fairly well. So, as I said, I expect to be finished in a couple of weeks. This is not a Donald Trump couple of weeks. That will always be a couple of weeks. I don't know. Those of you who are not Americans may not know this, but one of Donald Trump's little ploys is whenever anybody asked him about anything, he'd always say, we're going to have that in a couple of weeks. I won't try to do an imitation. We're going to have that in a couple of weeks. It's going to be the greatest. Everybody's going to love it. And, these things, many of these things went on for years and years during his presidency and afterward. And it was always 2 weeks. Hey, we're going to have that in 2 weeks. It's going to be the greatest thing. Already grown men have come to me weeping, saying, thank you so much. That whole thing that he does. So this is not me saying, I know I said 2 weeks last week, and I'm saying 2 weeks again, but that's, first of all, it's because we had a minor medical emergency with my dad, who's doing fine. So not to make that sound like an excuse or to sound like it's worse than it was. I mean, he's okay. He had to go to the hospital for a couple of days. He's 90. He's 90. I mean, he's not going to be with us forever, but thank goodness he's still with us now. So had that happen and some other things that had to be dealt with. So I'm still about 2 weeks away from finishing the book, but I honestly think it's about 2 weeks away. And then I can get to work on some other stuff, including, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, including the fact that I'm probably going to have to write 2 books at once again, which I haven't done for a while, not in any serious sense. I've worked on other projects while working on my novels. But it hasn't been since I wrote the first volume of Shadow March, and because I knew that was probably going to lose us money, I wrote War of the Flowers at the same time so that we would have an income for that year. This writing game, it's not all it's cracked up to be, but I'm not complaining. Anyway, so that's what's going on. I'm working on that stuff. Deb has got a place for herself to work in the household, which is a big deal for her. And I'm not just talking in the Virginia Woolf sense of having to have a room of your own, but just in the pure human sense that we all need a place to do our work. And my wife is a very hard worker who's always got a lot of stuff going on. And not only does she do all of our family business and do all of the business of my business as well. She's our point person on all the contractual stuff and things like that. But then she's also doing her own fabric art. At different times she's done other things, but she's been working fabric art for the last several years and doing beautiful work, by the way. So that's stuff. Whoops. That's like doing giant abstract paintings or something. I mean, she's making big knitting and crocheting projects and things like that and needs room. So we had to make sure she had a table where she could spread things out and line things up and try different combinations and stuff. So Deb's got that now, and so she is a happier bunny than she would have been than she was without it. And what else is going on? Young people still okay. John, the nervous large dog, is slowly getting better, although he's still petrified every time the roof creaks, and he's still not entirely used to the idea that this is not just a temporary aberration. He's still trying to figure it out. Like, wait, one day I was living here where I lived like my whole life, and then now all of a sudden I'm living somewhere else, and they're all acting like it's normal. Am I not supposed to have noticed this? Have I been abducted by aliens? Poor dog. And he's a nervous guy anyway, so. Meanwhile, the small dog is just his normal, usual, insane, annoying, slightly lovable self as well. And Cat Lily, who is no longer with me in the office here, is actually living her best life because she is now living with one of our two young people in the house. So she has a room that is more or less constantly shared, as opposed to, excuse me, as opposed to my office, which was just me in there when I was in there, and then after 10 o'clock at night or something, I very seldom was in there with her. So now she has a full-time roommate, and she seems quite happy with that. And I have a feeling, don't tell anybody, but I have a feeling I may lose that cat. She may go with our young people when they move out, this last group of young people, because our I don't know what you'd call him, our semi-son, Max, who is, we have of our two left, two of ours have moved out, two are left, and our semi-son, who we didn't adopt or anything, but he moved in with us about 5-6 years ago for various reasons, and he's our biological son's best friend since they were little kids. Max is very attached to Lily, so I have a feeling after he's had her living in there with him for however long they're going to be with us, that I'm going to have trouble getting her back. And to be honest, if that happens, I will let her go with my blessings, because better for her to have a full-time companion buddy, especially since she's an indoor cat, than to be a part-timer with me in and out of the office and going through hours and hours and hours every day of not being in it. Okay, so what could I possibly come up with more trivial than the disposition of the cat and whether it's up to her specifications or not? I don't know. It's been a busy week, but things are moving forward, and that's what matters. And my dad is back, and he's doing better. It seems to have been just an infection thing. He's got long-term issues, but at the moment he seems to be back to status quo ante, as we say, which just means the way things were before. And let me think, what else? That's really just about it. There's not a huge lot to tell at the moment because I'm just cranking away. Had a really nice interview with the folks from Chewing Pages. That was really fun. I enjoyed that. I hope some of you got a chance to see it. If not, what can I tell you? It's probably a lot of it is stuff you've heard me say before in one form or another, although we had a very nice long conversation. So, and we all got a few bon mots off during the course of the discussion. And I'll let you know when I'll be doing more of this stuff. Those of you in the UK, there's a good chance we are going to be in England in September. I have no idea what will be happening, but we will probably do at least one signing in London. So those of you within shouting distance of London will be very welcome to come and join us. I don't know if we'll be doing anything elsewhere. This is more of a trip that just Deb and I are taking to see friends and family. So I can't guarantee there'll be any other events, but I'll probably do a couple things excuse me, I'll probably do a couple things in London, and I will make mention of that when I know. Um, Sometime next year, I think I'm also going to be going back to Germany. I imagine they will be timing it to go with one of the books. So I will let you know when that's going to be, because it would be lovely to see some of you and get a chance to renew acquaintances with those of you who I've already met and to meet those of you who I have not met. Let me think. Any other Tad or book related news? Oh, the I've forgotten his name now, but the gentleman who does Library Ladder, um, who did one of his blog pieces, podcast pieces about my work. That particular podcast was about me, and it was titled something like "Tad Williams was late for his own revolution." And he did a piece the other day that said the greatest living fantasy writer. It's not who you think. And I was going, "Ooh, is it me? Is it me?" And of course it wasn't. It was Guy Gavriel Kay, who's a wonderful writer. Although I have to disagree. I have to disagree with Library Ladder because I think anybody talking about the greatest living fantasy writer who doesn't pick Michael Moorcock at this point is barking up the wrong tree. Mike has done everything in our field and has basically pioneered whole elements of the fantasy and science fiction genre. Was around for a lot of the major changes and was instrumental in many of the major changes. Has an incredible, I mean, even more so than Guy Kay or me or Dan Simmons or anybody else I can think of, has an incredibly wide range of different kinds of things he's done, not just in terms of genre, but in terms of types of writing within genres. So from high literary fantasy to, kind of sword and sorcery, adventure stories, I mean, everything. And, if you want to read a more or less modern novel by him that is just an astoundingly good piece of work, you could try Mother London. If you want to see a really odd and fascinating version of the Elizabethan court, read Gloriana by him, because it's kind of a weird, slightly fairy tale-ish version of the Elizabethan court. And just, his output has been amazing and varied and all that. And leaving aside the fact that he was a big influence on me and one of my very favorite writers as I was sort of moving that direction in life as a teenager and afterward. Just as far as I'm concerned, he is probably now our main living grandmaster, now that a few others are gone, like Ursula Le Guin, who might, compete with him for that title of greatest living fantasy writer. So I just wanted to mention that. And, if enough people die, maybe it'll be me someday, but I hope Mike is with us for a long time. And I hope, for that matter, that Guy Kay, who's a lovely guy and a great writer, I hope Guy Gavriel Kay is with us for a long time too. So at least in the view of Library Ladder, I probably won't make won't make the top of the list, not unless I outlast a bunch of people. But and I'd rather have them around. So anyway, with all of that said, I'm almost out of not almost out, but I've babbled away a large part of the broadcast already. So let me see who else I hadn't said hello to yet who's here. And I do see Petra. Hello, Petra. And let me see if there's anybody else. Did I see? There's Dirk. Okay, who we got here? James. James is with us. Hello, James. Robert Henry. Hello, Robert. Suzanne. Kristen, I already said hello to. Dirk. There's Dirk. Julian. Hello, Julian. And Yanni, or Janny, but probably Yanni or Yana Anderson. Astro Rays. I don't know if that's the name or a business name or whatever, but it's cool. And I think I've said hello to everybody else, but there's probably a few more on there I can't see. But anyway, so that's the news from Lake Chaos. And I will let you know if there's anything else of significance to be passed along. And now we're going to try an experiment, which is I'm going to read, but after several kind offers of people finding me a book and me looking for my own book, my own copy of the book, and not having any luck, I suddenly went, hey, why don't I get my own book on the Kindle app, and instead of using it on my phone, I'll get the app directly on my computer. So that's how I'm doing it. So I'm reading this off the screen. So while I am doing that, I cannot see myself talking. So if like a giant spider is coming down to land on my head or the back wall catches fire or something like that, I won't know about it because I won't be able to see myself. But that has its own benefits. Never get old. That's just my tip for any of you who might be thinking about it and going like, what should I do in the next couple of years? Maybe I'll get old. Nah, ain't worth it. Anyway, because for one thing, you have to get up every day and look at yourself in the mirror and go, who the hell is that? And what the hell happened to the vibrant young person that is supposed to be looking back at me? But, as I said, no real complaints, because what's the alternative? The alternative is not to get older. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is to die young. And I did not intend to do that, and I managed to successfully circumvent that possibility by living to get old. So anyway, chapter 41. Oh, so yeah, before we had to go into my moving hiatus, there were a bumload of different things that were happening in the book. And the basic two things that you want to know is that in the course of saving Gideon from being essentially tricked, maneuvered, drugged by a crazy fungus into signing away Ordinary Farm to the Needles, Gideon was saved from that. The fungus proved to be a much worse thing than anybody thought. The residents of the farm managed to electrocute it, while the Carrillo kids were, at least some of them, were on the property. And things nearly went completely south, but they did manage to save themselves from that particular menace. At the same time, Tyler and Steve Carrillo were in the washstand mirror, and they came back with the long-lost Grace, and who's Gideon's lost spouse, who has been missing for a long time, and who Tyler met and had some communication with his first time through the mirror. So that's the basic thing that's going on. There were like a ton of other things going on, but if I try to sum them all up, first of all, I probably won't remember, and second of all, we won't get to do any reading. So now I'm going to read. So chapter 41, Like a Rolling Snake. Steve Carrillo's parents came to pick him up about noon, and as they pulled up to the front gate in their pickup and got out, they looked as though they hadn't gotten any more sleep the previous night than Tyler and Lucinda and the rest of the folk at Ordinary Farm. By the time you get done being grounded, Mr. Carrillo told his son, you're going to be ready for the retirement home. It was all my fault, sir, Tyler said. It was my idea. Steve was just helping me. Helping himself to a big punishment, said Mrs. Carrillo sharply. Behind her, Alma and Carmen, who didn't know yet what had happened, made mocking faces from the back seat. Tyler gave them an embarrassed wave. Hector Carrillo turned to Ragnar, whose visible skin was covered with stripes of purple bruises. And how are you all? Mr. Carrillo asked. You said on the telephone that Gideon had a relapse? Ragnar nodded. But he will be well, I think. The crisis has finally passed. For good, this time. He is being tended. You didn't take him back to the hospital? Said Sylvia. Ragnar shrugged. He did not wish to go. He still needs to talk to us, said Hector. And Tyler realized that the man's anger had not all been directed at his son and Tyler Jenkins. This time he will, I promise, Ragnar said. Things will change. You have my word on it. He extended his hand, and Hector Carrillo took it. They shook, then Hector asked, Where's Simos? He usually comes out to say hello. He... Ragnar's face grew somber, but all he said was, You must forgive him. He had a difficult night. Hey, Jenkins, Steve shouted to Tyler from the rear window of his father's truck. If you get a chance, come see me before you leave. You don't have to call first. I mean, it's not like I'll be going anywhere. Thanks to you. Tyler couldn't help smiling as they drove off. Steve was a good guy, a real friend. Is Gideon really going to talk to them about their property? How's anyone going to make him? The Norseman was still looking grim as he opened the gate. The power to the fence was off and had been since the electrical storm. The remaining pair of manticores were safely padlocked in their adobe brick barn. Things will change around here. They must. Only one more day remained now until Tyler and Lucinda took the train back home. An ordinary farm was as sharply divided as ever, with most of its residents on one side and the Needles on the other. Nothing had been resolved, of course. Gideon no longer seemed to be brainwashed, but he had only been conscious for short stretches and had been too tired even to sit up, let alone deal with the weighty matters that needed his attention. Mr. Walkwell was not much better and was being nursed on the couch in the same room with Gideon, so that Sarah and her helpers could watch over both patients at the same time. Tyler didn't know what the greenhouse monster had done to him, but Simos Walkwell had only woken up for the first time the previous evening and still hadn't said much more than a few words, although Sarah said he seemed better this morning. Interestingly enough, Tyler had also discovered that there were now several gunshot holes in the snake parlor walls. Obviously, things that night hadn't only been happening beyond the mirror and out by the greenhouse. Although nothing permanent could be accomplished until Gideon was back in charge, Ragnar and Sarah had at least managed by sheer stubbornness and threats of force to chase Mrs. Needle away from Gideon's bedside, and the snake parlor in general, so the witch had retreated behind the locked door of her part of the house. Colin spent most of his time with her, or at least in his room, which was about what Tyler would have expected. The previous summer, the Jenkins kids might have stayed silent about things, and wouldn't have expected to receive any useful answers even if they had asked questions. But now something had changed, not least of which was how Tyler and Lucinda felt about things. Even if they hadn't become the heirs to the farm, despite all the chaos of that night, it didn't seem as though anybody had actually managed to change Gideon's will. Tyler knew that their great-uncle had at least been planning to do it. The way he figured it, they had a right to know what was going on. And he was pleasantly surprised to find out that Ragnar Lodbrok, at least, seemed to agree. Tyler found the Norseman examining the blackened wreckage at the back of the garden. It was still hard to believe what had happened out here only a couple of days before, but as they stood looking at the melted ruins of the metal greenhouse and the yards-wide crater of blackened vegetation and scorched animal carcasses. But the evidence was right in front of him. It looked like someone had firebombed the place. "We will haul away the metal bars," Ragnar said. "They have a furnace in Liberty where they melt old metal. That will make sure the seeds are dead." He poked with his foot at part of a bird lying on the ground. Tyler had no idea what kind of bird it had been. "The rest we will bury. If I knew a priest, I would bring him to bespell the demon's grave." "It wasn't really a demon, was it?" Tyler asked. "More of a big mushroom, really." Ragnar looked at him with disbelief. "If that thing was only a mushroom,
Then the Fenris wolf himself is just a pup, and the Midgard serpent no more than an eel.
Tyler couldn't think of anything to say to that. "What's going to happen with the farm?" he asked after a while. "After Lucinda and I go home. You can't just let Mrs. Needle get away with everything she did, can you?"
"It is not so easy, Tyler Jenkins," said Ragnar. "They are like Gideon's kin. And would you have us kill her and leave her son an orphan?"
"You could kill him too." Tyler saw the look on Ragnar's face. I'm just kidding."
"I do not much like the boy, but his crimes are nothing like his mother's," the Viking said. "It would be hard to imprison her, but possible."
"Why don't you just throw her out?"
"So that she is out of our sight and reach, like that terrible man, Kingery."
Ragnar and others had searched up and down Coomish Creek, but had found no body or any other sign of Jackson Kingery.
"Should we send her out to roam the world with all of Ordinary Farm's secrets in her head, plotting mischief against us, against Gideon?"
Tyler frowned. Put like that, it really wasn't very simple. "But she can't get away with what she did. What she tried to do, she could have killed us all."
"I know," Ragnar said. "And when Simos is well again, we will do our best to make a plan to keep her from doing evil."
"What are you going to do?" The Norseman shook his head.
"I have not talked to Simos, so I will not share my thoughts yet. Gideon is still master of this place, and still my thane. Not you, young Tyler. Not yet."
He looked at Tyler's outraged expression, and a trace of amusement crept over his broad, bearded face.
"What, do you hate secrets so much? Don't you have a few of your own, boy? What about the woman hidden in your sister's room?"
Tyler flushed.
"Grace? But that's different. That's a good secret. And I'll share it with Gideon as soon as he's well enough to know what's going on. Besides, she's barely been awake herself."
Much to Lucinda's irritation, of course, since it meant she had to share her brother's room. Grace seemed to be sleeping off the effects of her years of fugitive existence in the Mirror House, waking only to take a little nourishment and peer around in confusion before going back to sleep again. The kitchen women had been nursing her, when they were not ministering to Gideon and Mr. Walkwell, with Ulla, the Ice Age girl, taking the lead, perhaps fascinated by someone even newer to the modern world than herself.
"Remember, you are not a grown man yet," Ragnar began, as if Tyler didn't already know that.
But the Norseman was interrupted by a flutter of wings as a small shape swooped down out of the hot, bright sky. The lightning storm and the rain had passed with that terrible night and already seemed as distant as an old nightmare. A second later, Tyler was laughing and trying to keep tiny hands from pulling off his eyebrows and poking up his nose. "Zaza, you're back! I missed you, girl. I've hardly seen you all summer." Ragnar watched the winged monkey climbing on Tyler's head, then looked to the misshapen blob of metal and charcoal that had once been the greenhouse. As he stroked his beard, another faint smile curved his lips.
"Animals know much we do not, Tyler Jenkins. If the little ape will come to this place again, perhaps we do not need a priest after all."
With Zaza riding shotgun on his shoulder, Tyler followed Ragnar out to the reptile barn, where the three amigos and Haneb were clearing up the wreckage left by the Manticore's break-in. Lucinda was there too, standing a few yards away from Desta's pen. The young dragon was pointedly ignoring her. and Tyler thought his sister looked miserable, like she had a crush on some high school big shot who didn't even know her name. The manticores had caused a great deal of destruction in the huge barn, tearing open metal cabinets and scattering feed bags and canisters everywhere, terrorizing and killing some of the smaller or slower animals. Tyler was glad those remains had already been cleaned up, and generally creating as much havoc as an entire herd of elephants. Tyler could still see one of the step ladders hanging from a beam 30 feet overhead, but couldn't begin to guess how it had gotten there. Only 2 of the manticores had survived that terrible night. The fungus had lured and destroyed 2, and a third had apparently come too close to Meseret's pen, only a bloody stump of tail left behind afterward to show what had happened. After the way the first one had attacked Ragnar and the rest of them at the gate, Tyler didn't feel sorry for the manticores, but he was happy to know the last pair were back safe in their cage. They were rare, amazing things. There was no question about that. Tyler just didn't ever want to see one again. As Tyler surveyed the damage, Lucinda walked over to him, a baby amphisbaena looking around confusedly from the palm of her hand. At least Tyler thought it was looking around, but it might also be waving its tail in the air. Even near the end of their second summer, it was still hard to tell which end of an amphisbaena was which. "How are Gideon and Mr. Walkwell this morning?" his sister asked. "Sarah said Gideon's better this morning. Eating a little, talking, making sense even." He reached out and stroked the little creature on its nearest end. It was the front, he could now see, although its implacable stare didn't give much away. "I think I'm going to bring Grace down to him this afternoon. Mr. Walkwell's a little better too," she said. Lucinda carefully put the lizard back into its cage. "Are you sure? He's not very well. This'll make him feel better. Besides, we're leaving soon." "It is too bad you cannot get advice from Simos first," said Ragnar from a short distance away. "He is very wise, and he was here before I was, before any of us who came from the fault line. In fact, he is the only one of us who knew Gideon's wife. Perhaps he knows something about the 2 of them that you do not, young Tyler Jenkins." "You know how much Gideon misses her," Tyler said. "What could be better for him than having her back?" He was distracted by a sudden whoop of noise from Kiwa and Jeg. The 2 of them were chasing a hoop snake, which had got loose from its pen and was bowling across the floor just out of their reach, tail in its mouth as it rolled like a wheel. Alarmed, Zaza leaped from Tyler's shoulder and flapped up into the upper reaches of the massive barn, where she hovered, shrieking indignantly at them all. "There he goes! Over there! Under the sprayer! Don't hurt him!" shouted Ragnar, laughing as he went to help them. "But remember, he can give you a good nip." As the third herdsman and Haneb joined in, the comic scene became even more frantic. Tyler turned to look for Lucinda. His sister was observing the chaos with all the joy of someone watching homework assignments being written on a blackboard. A moment later, she turned and walked out of the barn. "Luce!" he shouted, but she didn't acknowledge him. He didn't hurry after her. It was too much fun watching everybody trying to catch the swiftly rolling snake. The chase had excited and upset many of the other residents of the reptile barn, the basilisks hissing and the tiny cockatrices spattering the insides of their enclosures with venom, until even Meseret lifted her massive head above the edge of her pen to have a look. Zaza got so excited she peed on one of the amigos from midair, which only added to the shouting. "Wow," thought Tyler, enjoying the chaos. "Just look at this crazy place. Is there anywhere cooler on the entire planet? And me and Lucinda saved it again." Chapter 42, an interrupted moment. Colin Needle had walked around for 2 days with his head full of unpleasant thoughts. But no matter how he had considered things, no matter how he tried to explain them to himself, he couldn't make the worst one go away. Tyler Jenkins had been right. Colin's mother had been the one who had made Gideon sick. And, in trying to change Gideon's will, or whatever she had been up to on the night of the storm, he was still piecing the story together, she had also used her son's computer and the security system Colin had so painstakingly set up to let the manticores out. Bringing deadly danger not only to the other residents of the farm, but to her own son. But how could she do such a thing? Colin had always known his mother was difficult and temperamental, even knew that she had a cruel streak. But this was different. She had told him so many times that her excesses were on his behalf that he had believed it, in the same way he believed rain was good for plants. Now his life seemed to have been twisted into a completely different shape, one that he had never seen before and had no idea of how to use. As Colin reached the bottom of the stairs, he met Caesar coming out of the kitchen with what looked like Gideon's lunch, a tray with soup and bread and a sparkling white napkin rolled up and held in a silver ring. Colin nodded as Caesar went past, and Caesar nodded politely back. But suddenly Colin felt certain there was something other than politeness in the old man's dark brown eyes. Contempt? Outright hatred hidden only by his polished manners? Little Pema was dusting the furniture in the entry hall, and she too nodded to Colin as he passed, but despite the demure downward cast of her eyes, he fancied he could see her shrink back, as if she did not want even his shadow to touch her. He knew the kitchen women did not like him, but he had always supposed it was because of his bad temper, or the way he sometimes spoke without thinking, dismissing things he felt were plainly stupid. But was it more? Was their dislike of his mother deeper than what most workers felt for unsympathetic managers? Did they really hate and fear her? Did that mean they hated and feared Colin Needle as well? These were new thoughts, quite new, and Colin didn't know exactly what to do with them. For most of his life he had known that the other farm residents didn't like the Needles, but he had managed to convince himself that much of it came from the dislike the weak always felt for the strong. His mother was nothing if not strong. Sometimes her strength even scared her own son. Why shouldn't it make others nervous? But one day, while Gideon was still missing, Colin had found a few envelopes from the Madagascar crate near the old abandoned greenhouse, and had wondered why his normally so careful mother would bring those foreign seeds and spores to the garden, where the risk of them causing mischief in an entirely new environment was so great. Why wouldn't she simply raise them under controlled conditions? Later, when Lucinda had been overwhelmed by the spores from the greenhouse, Colin had begun to be suspicious, but still hadn't been able to make sense of it. When Lucinda told him what kind of spores they were, and he thought about Gideon's mysterious disappearance in return, it all began to make a kind of terrible sense. It wasn't her experiments with the exotic plants and fungi his mother had needed to hide away from the house's inhabitants. It was who she had been experimenting on, Gideon Goldring himself. His mother must have been hiding the old man out in the garden. Somehow, his mother, Patience Needle, had knocked Gideon out and dragged him to the greenhouse all by herself, only to have him escape on the 4th of July. Witch. It was a word that came up out of the darkest places inside Colin,
like a belch of foul gas from the bottom of a deep pool. His mother was a witch, and not the good kind. It wasn't the first time he had heard it, or even the first time he had thought it himself, but it was the first time he had really let himself feel what it meant. My mother is a witch. Colin Needle had never felt so alone. He stood in the shade of the porch, sweat dripping down his face and making his clothes stick to his skin. Although the storms had passed, the sky was just cloudy enough to make the day as close as it was hot. He was thinking he might go and look at Elliot. He was thinking he might go and look at Elliot, the sea serpent, whose silvery splashing sometimes gave Colin a feeling of freedom that very few other things did, when a movement in the distance caught his attention. Lucinda Jenkins was walking slowly toward the farmhouse, trudging through the shadow cast by the tall grain silo that stood over the fault line. He didn't know what he was going to say to her, didn't know if he could think of anything to say. But she looked like she didn't feel any better than he did, so at least he wouldn't have to try to make cheerful conversation. Colin knew he wasn't very good at that. He waved awkwardly as she climbed the steps to the porch. "Hi." She looked up at him and smiled, but he felt sure it was the same smile she would have given any stranger on the street. "Oh, hi, Colin." She had paused for a moment, but now she looked as though she was going to continue past him into the house. He suddenly didn't want to be on his own again. He said as if it actually meant something. You want some lemonade? I think Sarah just made some." Lucinda looked at him again, more closely this time. After a couple of seconds, she seemed to relax, although she still looked sad. "Yeah, sure, that would be nice. Just wait, and I'll go get it." When he came out again a few minutes later with 2 glasses, she was sitting in one of the rocking chairs. He handed her one of the glasses and let himself down into the other one, careful not to spill. Just for once, he didn't want to do anything clumsy, didn't want to embarrass himself. "So," he said as she drank, "you're going home tomorrow, hmm?" She nodded. "Yeah, I guess it's just as well. Desta hates me." It took Colin a moment to put it all together. "Oh, the little dragon. Well, don't feel too bad. They've always hated me." She gave him a slightly annoyed look. "You do know that's your own fault, right, Colin?" For a moment he wanted to argue, loudly if necessary. Didn't anyone understand that he was trying to make important things happen? But just as suddenly as the need had filled him, it leaked out again. He took a deep breath and let it go. Yes, I suppose you're right. I've certainly done my share of stupid things, selfish things." She lifted an eyebrow. Lucinda Jenkins was really quite pretty, he noticed again. Not flashy like the oldest Carrillo girl who dressed like someone you'd see on a teenage TV show, all jangly bracelets and complicated hairstyles, but very nice nonetheless, her hair straight and shiny, her serious face, so pale a few weeks ago, now quite tan. "Do you really mean that, Colin?" she asked. "Or are you trying to butter me up for something?" He shook his head. I don't know. I've been wanting to talk to you about a lot of things." He suddenly realized that one of the things he wanted to tell her was that he liked her in a way that was different than with anyone else he knew, but Starting that particular conversation seemed as terrifying as diving out of a moving airplane at night with a parachute that might or might not work. Talk about what's been going on here, he said, about some of the things you said, because some of them were right. What do you mean? Her weariness had been set aside. She looked interested, even sympathetic, and for the first time since the night of the storm, Colin felt as though things might not be as wretched as they seemed. Well, he hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by all the thoughts in his head. What could he tell her? That he agreed his mother was dangerous? That he was beginning to be really frightened of her, not just in the old ways, but in entirely new ones? After all, Lucinda and her brother were leaving. It was Colin who would be stuck on the farm with all these people who already hated him. What if his mother found out what he had been thinking, these disloyal thoughts? What if she found out he had been talking to the Jenkins children about her? On the other hand, what if he said nothing, and next time something really bad happened? But before he could speak again, a shout rolled across the open space beyond the driveway. Hey! Hey, Luce! It was Tyler Jenkins, jogging toward them, shirt untucked, baseball cap sideways, looking like the perfect model of a stupid American middle schooler. Colin felt his insides twist with disappointment and resentment. As he reached the porch, Lucinda said, "Hi, Tyler." Did Colin fancy he heard a little disappointment in her voice, too? If so, that almost made the intrusion worthwhile. Hang on a second, I'm just talking to... At first, Tyler didn't even look at him. You should have seen it, Luce. It was totally epic. One of the hoop snakes got out, then Zaza got spooked, and she got into Haneb's hair, and he was screaming and jumping around trying to get her out. He slowed, then stopped, staring at Colin. What's your problem, Needle? Can't I talk to my own sister? Colin swallowed an angry reply. Go on, Jenkins, say what you want to say. Nobody's stopping you. Really? You're sure acting like you wish you could. Was I interrupting something? None of your business. He heard the sound of his own voice, cold and angry, and at that moment it was just how he wanted to sound. Tyler, said Lucinda, we were just talking. Don't be a jerk. What? Her brother turned toward her, face red. Why is it my fault? He's the one sitting there like he wants to punch me. Colin stood up so abruptly the rocking chair's skids squeaked on the porch boards. Forget it. Just forget it. Enjoy yourself, you two. Really a pity you'll be leaving tomorrow. It breaks my heart to think of it. And without even listening to what Lucinda Jenkins was saying, because what kind of fool had he been to think she would ever understand anyway, Colin turned and banged through the door into the house. He almost knocked down little Pema as he stormed through the entry hall, heading for the stairs and the security of his own room, but the thought of apologizing to her never even crossed his mind. And that is... Should we read a little bit of the next one? Yeah, we can read a little bit of the next one. Although I think the last chapter is very short, so probably tomorrow we're going to have a short night's reading. Chapter 43, Saving Grace. I'm just going to read till I get to a good stopping point. Chapter 43, Saving Grace. Are you still mad at me? Come on, I didn't even do anything this time. That was mostly true. After all the fights her brother had picked with Colin Needle, he hadn't really been too bad this time. But Lucinda was frustrated at how close Colin had been to opening up to her. Don't you get it? He was telling me that we were right about everything, stupid. She bent to pick up Colin's lemonade glass, abandoned on the porch. So? We were. We could have had him on our side. Tyler made a disgusted face. Like anyone would want him on their side. Forget it. You're impossible. She carried the glasses into the house. The door to the snake parlor was closed, which probably meant Gideon was having a nap. He was supposed to be getting better. Lucinda hoped they'd get a chance to see him before they left. As she rinsed the glasses in the kitchen, she tried to figure out why Tyler crashing into the middle of the conversation like a runaway truck upset her so much. It wasn't just because she and Tyler were going to leave tomorrow, and things seemed even more confused than they had last year. It hadn't even been because for a moment it had seemed like they had a chance to make Colin Needle an ally, although that would certainly make things a lot easier. Lucinda had a feeling the fight for Ordinary Farm was going to get really, really nasty before long. No, it was something else. Colin had seemed almost nice. That was what bothered her. He had been lost and confused and scared and looking for help. And he had turned to Lucinda. She had seen something in him she had never seen before. The Colin that was separate from his crazy, scary mother. The Colin that was more than just a strange, nerdy kid who dressed badly and had been raised in a crazy place without any other kids around. For a moment, she had thought she was seeing the real Colin. Then Tyler had stomped in, and the moment was lost. Maybe forever. Azinza swept into the kitchen with a tray full of crockery. "Gideon is feeling better, and he is going to talk to us," she announced with great satisfaction. Pema and Sarah came in just behind her, and the wide room was suddenly full of noise and movement. "What? Who?" Lucinda realized she had been standing over the sink for several minutes, lost in thought. "Gideon, girl! Caesar is giving him a bath and dressing him." Azinza put the tray down so hurriedly that the cups and bowls rattled. "Which means he will be also told your brother's secret. A happy day. I will bring some flowers for his room." "Just a few," said Sarah. "The parlor will be full of people. I don't want anyone to knock over the good vases." But the cook was clearly excited, too. All the women had been helping take care of Grace up in Lucinda's room, and all of them were agog to see what would happen when Gideon and his long-lost wife were reunited. Whoa! Lucinda felt a sudden pang of worry. For some reason, she just couldn't imagine that Ragnar and Mrs. Needle would both stand by quietly without telling Gideon what had been going on during his illness. Ragnar would tell the truth, of course, but Mrs. Needle would have to lie, and then things would get very, very difficult. "I have to go talk to my brother," she said abruptly, and headed for the door, leaving Sarah, Pema, and Azinza to look at each other in surprise. And that's where I'm going to stop, because it's just about that time. And that's why I'm leaving some decent amount left to read for tomorrow night, when I will return and we will continue reading. God, you know something? I didn't even think to check to make sure that the broadcast was still going on. Looks like it still is. Yeah, I think so. Hope so. Didn't check. I should have checked. Okay. Oh, and there's Tash. Tash showed up. Hello, Tash. Good to see you. Anyway, good. It seems like it was all running all the time, so super duper. Oh, in case you were wondering what I'm wearing tonight, I'm wearing my Shrimp Pimp t-shirt, which was a present from one of my friends, and relates to the Tim and Eric Awesome Show, Great Job. And if you know what that is, good for you. If you don't know what that is, I'm sorry for you. You're missing something quite bizarre and charming.
Anyway, and especially the shrimp. It's impossible to explain. You'd have to see the series of shrimp and white wine sketches featuring the Beaver Boys. Uh, Again, too hard to explain. So, anyway, with that, I will say I'll be back tomorrow, 7 p.m., in which point we will finish off. I'm pretty sure we will finish, yeah, one way or the other, we will finish Secrets of Ordinary Farm. And what do I want to say besides Not much, really. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, my time. I'm going to cash out. I thank you all for joining me. As always, it's a great pleasure to have you, and it's a pleasure to be doing this again and having a chance to see you all. So take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones, family members, friends, acquaintances, neighbors, anybody who's in need of it if you can. Lend a little help where you can. And I will see you very soon. So have a good rest of your day if you're in the part of the world where there's still some of your day left. And if you're in my part of the world, enjoy your night and sleep well. And I'll see you soon. Peace.